This video is a continuation of an earlier video I did on the subject of death, the afterlife, and how that affects living authentically in this life. It's also partially a response to Bradshaw66 and Charles and his pair of highly intriguing and poignant videos on the subject. Charles, when you spoke of the self, you spoke of it as inherently transcendent, and you invoked Schopenhauer in aid of this idea. And I'd like to touch on some of the philosophy and ideas of Schopenhauer insofar as it's relevant to this discussion in a moment. First, I would like to expand on the idea of the self as an entity itself and what exactly it means, and especially what the significance of finitude and infinity are insofar as it's concerned. Now, you seem to intimate, or I suppose outright state, that the very idea of the self as limited or finite or simply not having an infinite capacity in any sense made it somehow less meaningful, less powerful as a concept. And in my view, I take quite the opposite vantage point on this subject. I find that as finite beings in this world, in the spatio-temporal constraints that we find ourselves in all around us, as beings with a terminable end in a finite world, that we can only understand ourselves properly if we first properly understand the idea of finitude itself and the idea of a terminable end. And I certainly don't think there's anything morbid or creepy or dark or scary or desolate or anything like that. Any of those terms, I don't ever consider that the existentialist take on death to be at all frightening or upsetting. Indeed, I find it rather uplifting, and I believe most existentialists do, even though, as a disclaimer, I myself do not consider myself to be an existentialist per se, but I am sympathetic with many of their ideals, and certainly the take on death I find rather ennobling. But when you speak of, you use adjectives like death's dark door, and you talk about there being hope for us insofar as we don't have to end, so to speak, in whatever fashion. And of course, I'm being very metaphysical here when I speak of an afterlife, of there being a literal, eternal continuation of your life on some other plane or whatever. Not of a sort of literal reincarnation of your body in various forms in the ground, and in which you take on various elements in the earth. That's kind of poetic, and that obviously, I suppose, is a form of infinite life. But that's not exactly what I'm addressing. I'm addressing the idea of avoiding death. The idea that death has to be somehow transcended. Because what really bothers me and troubles me about this notion is that death is only to be avoided if mortality itself is to be avoided. If there's something inherent in the concept of mortality that is on its face leaving one unfulfilled. If the idea of an infinite continuation of one's life on some other plane, planet, what have you, is necessary, then that means that their own finite lives are inherently and necessarily unfulfilling for them, that it leaves them vacant and in some sense empty. And that's really what the existentialist take on death, particularly Heidegger, is after here. The whole point of Dasein is an ennobling and liberating concept. There's nothing at all dreary about this or hopeless about this. It's the epitome of hope, actually. The idea of a being in the world, in this spatio-temporal time frame that we all find ourselves in, understanding ourselves as inherently finite means understanding what we are. It's delving into the deepest reaches of our essence and confronting that and in so doing realizing our total freedom. We become essentially our own gods in a way. We are beholden to no, as I've spoken of before, predetermined series of causal events. We're not just a dot on this long infinite line of corresponding events. We make ourselves, because we are finite, because we are terminable, and we will end at some point in time. It is us who determine what we are. It is